Hello everyone, and welcome to this hopefully pretty short video where I'm going to give you some indicators on how to use the Irish Newspapers Archive. It's a really good resource if you want to access back issues of local newspapers, or indeed a few of the national newspapers such as the Irish Independent, the Irish Examiner, and even back issues of the old Irish Press, which was a very popular national newspaper up until the mid-1990s. Now, you may need to, if you're trying to access the Irish Newspaper Archive, or indeed any other library, certain other library resources, you may need to click on off-campus access before you do so, especially if you're using your own laptop if you're at home. And you'll find that off-campus access usually on the homepage, the library homepage. It's usually down towards the bottom of the homepage on the left-hand side, and you can see that we're usually in a section called also in this section. I've actually put the X slightly below it there, but yeah, you can see it there. Anyway, presuming that you have access, or if you haven't access directly, you've gone through off-campus access, I'm now going to tell you how to get to the Irish Newspapers Archive. It's slightly more difficult than it was a few years ago because they've added in a few more steps. So anyway, here goes. First thing, on the library homepage, click on Collections. Then click on Electronic, and that's that one there. If you're looking for, say, books or journal articles, you'd usually click on General, but for this particular resource and other resources, you'll usually have to click on Electronic. Moving on swiftly, then you'll see a range of options there on the electronic options for the library. Now, back in the good old days, newspapers on archive of newspapers was an option here, but not anymore. Our Irish newspapers on the internet. Instead, we now have to go through electronic resources. So we click on that, and this opens up a new paragraph. So you can actually go through journals here as well. But what we're looking for here is the A to Z of databases. So we just click on A to Z of databases. Now this is fairly well organized, so you'll see at the top of the page you can click on from A all the way to Z to save you having to look through every database on the system. So we're looking for the Irish Newspaper Archive, so we click on I, and that cuts down our search to 20 databases. So we scroll down that page. Scrolling down that page, then you'll see there's actually a good few Irish related archives here. Like if you want to look at, say, other national newspapers, you'll see there's back issues of the Irish Times there. But as I said, we're looking for the Irish Newspapers Archive, so we'll click on this. And this brings us to this page here. So there's a formal login link there, so we go through staff and students naturally. And lo and behold, if everything's working okay, it brings you to the homepage of the Irish Newspaper Archive. I see there's a how to use the archives video there. I haven't actually ever looked at that because my needs are simple. I usually just go straight into browse, but by all means try that out. You might actually find out more effective ways or more efficient ways of using the archives than what I'm telling you to do. I generally just go into browse. Before I use the archives, I should just say it helps if you know, obviously, what newspapers you're interested in, but it also will help if you know what time period you're interested in. So those of you who are doing, say, elections research, it's always good beforehand to do a bit of research, find out when the most recent elections were held, or more specifically, if you're looking at, say, the last general election, find out the date for the last general election. So in the case of Ireland, you're talking about, I think it was the 7th of February 20 20, around that period. Because that'll tell you, that'll cut down your search then. You'll know then if you're doing electoral research, okay, I want the newspapers immediately after the date of the election to look at the results analysis. But I'll also want to look at the newspapers in the weeks before the election to see details on the election campaign, or maybe even a few months beforehand. If you're trying to look up, if you're trying to research or look up information about specific places, say if you're doing the Geography and Me GY310B option as opposed to, say, the electoral GY310B option, in that case then it's good, maybe if you want to do background research, maybe try and pinpoint any significant dates relating to that place. So if you know something big happened on a certain day, then you'll know, okay, if you know, say, May, the 15th of May 1982 is a very significant date, then you'll know, okay, I want to look up newspaper archives relating to this date, ideally immediately after this date, so I can see what local newspaper coverage was given to this event, significant event in my own home place. Other than that, you can of course do a general browse and just kind of, especially if you've got good broadband, just go to the archives, pick out the 1 or 2 or 3 local newspapers relating to your home area. And some areas you might find you've actually got access to 2 or 3 newspapers in terms of the Irish newspaper archives. Other places, I'll be honest, especially if you're talking about Dublin, it can be difficult to even find 1 local newspaper. But all you can do is actually check out the archive and see what's there. So we move on. We'll click on Browse anyway, and this into this page here. So the page you go to, it'll open up on, say, back issues of the Irish Independent, and it'll show the most recent edition or issues of the Irish Independent there. So I'm looking at this in early February, so you can see it's showing you recent papers from February 2023. But if you go to where it says select title and just click and just scroll down to see what's there. So I'll let you do that yourself. There's probably over 100 different newspapers on this system now. Some newspapers, you've got back issues going way back to the late 1800s, and you've got issues, kind of modern day issues, probably as recent as, in some cases, the date last week or yesterday. So it's a really good resource. As I said, there's the Irish Independent, Sunday Independent, there's the Irish Examiner. I think the Farmers Journal might be there. Anyway, you can check that yourself if you're interested in that aspect. But there are a lot of local newspapers on this archive system. So as I said, scroll down to see, can you find your own? Just as I was telling one of the students, sometimes just make sure you know the specific title of your newspaper. And sometimes sometimes you might think it's not there, but if you look around, you'll see they just have the title slightly different. So for instance, those of us from around Laois, Kildare, Carlow, we would know the Nationalist would usually refer to the Carlow Nationalist. But here there's the Nationalist, which is Tipperary. And I think on this system, the Carlow Nationalist is down as Nationalist, and Leinster Times, which is there. So sometimes you had to fish around, and sometimes you might think your newspaper isn't there, but it actually is. So we're surfing anyway, we're checking down. In this instance, I'm going to look up information on the last general election in Limerick. So I'm looking for back issues of local Limerick newspapers. I'll see there's a Limerick Chronicle, but that only covers, I think, from 1994 to 2001. But I'll see also we have the Limerick Leader, which is of course the main local newspaper in Limerick. And I'll be honest, if you're interested in electoral research, probably the best local newspaper in the country in terms of elections coverage. And that's got back issues going way back to 1905, but it's also got back issues to current. So basically telling you that this is one of the local newspapers that's regularly updated here. You'll probably find last week's Limerick Leader on this site when you come to check it. Okay, so we're going to select Limerick Leader. This brings us to so once you go into a new newspaper, you'll see all the years that are covered. You'll see them up there at the top, so all the way up to 2003. And now I've clicked on 2020, and I've then gone to so clicked on 2020 there. Sorry, the years are all up there just in case you can't see that. And you can scroll all the way back, in this case to 1905. And then along the side, you'll see all the different months. So it'll naturally open up in January, but I know the election was in February, so I'll click on February, and then all the February 2020 newspapers will open up. So if I'm interested in election coverage, see, okay, the early newspapers in February, they're talking about the campaign, what's happening in the election, but I just want to see the newspaper for the week after the election, which will give you the immediate election coverage and election analysis. Limerick Leader is interesting. There's a city Limerick Leader and a county Limerick Leader. So I'm a Culchie. I'm from rural Ireland, so I generally trust Culchie newspapers more than city newspapers. So I'm going to click on the county edition of the Limerick Leader or the Culchie edition of the Limerick Leader, because I just think when it comes to elections, Culchie newspapers give you that bit more detail. And lo and behold, I then go to the newspaper itself, and once you go into a new newspaper, you'll see right at the top the pages there. You can just flick with the arrows. The arrows on the left, surprise, surprise, will push you back. So if you open on page 1, this arrow is not much use. So you just keep pressing the arrow, go to 2, 3, 3, 4, sorry, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and lo and behold, I come to 8, 9. So if I'm looking for election coverage, I'll see there's plenty in this newspaper, especially this beautiful thing here. Those of us who are interested in election coverage, this is what we really love to see. Tally data, how your area voted. It gives you really, really detailed information on how different places within a constituency voted in an election. If you follow elections, you'll generally know that in Ireland, official election information is quite limited. So they just give you the official election results to tell you how many votes candidates won on the first count, and then the second count, third count, fourth count, all the way to the 29 count in a regular election. But you never get any information in terms of official information telling you, well, this is how Mary Murphy's 4,500 votes broke down. This is where she won, all the different places she won those votes. But tally figures will give that to you. And some local newspapers will print tally figures immediately after an election. Not all newspapers, sadly, but some do. And the Limerick Leader, and generally most of the newspapers in the North Midlands and the West, are pretty good at doing this. So here already, I've struck gold. I've found tally figures. So I know if I'm doing an elections project, an electoral geography project, or if I'm doing a project for political geography, boom, I've got all this lovely data. I can go into this and I can pull out a few places and show Adrian Kavanagh or William Durkin or Keelan Darcy, look, I've done my research and I've worked out that in Abbeyfeale, this candidate won X percentage of the vote, this other candidate won X percentage of the vote. Impressive. And there's also loads of articles relating to specific aspects of the election. As I say, if you know specifically what you want from a particular newspaper or a set of newspapers, it makes things easier. But if you just want to do a general flick through newspapers, by all means do that. If you've got good broadband, you can generally flick through a newspaper very quickly. Once you flick through 2 or 3 or 4 news editions of a newspaper, you'll know exactly where to find information. You'll know, for instance, that after about 2 or 3 runs through different issues of a newspaper, you'll know, say, the last 10 pages are all sport, and you might be interested in that, or the last 10, 20 pages are sport and advertising and personal notices, and you'll know, okay, I don't need to look at those. So that means that when you get to those pages, or the first of those pages, you'll know, okay, there's nothing more I can find out of this newspaper. I'll go to a previous issue. So yeah, you can use these archives as well, just for a quick flick around, say if you're doing a project relating to a specific place, and just have a quick flick through to see is there any recent newspaper articles relating to the place you're looking at. If you're doing electoral studies, electoral geography studies, you can do a flick through the newspapers in the months leading up to an election, because you might find some brilliant nuggets of information. You might come across, say, the Sinn Féin Selection Convention, or the Fine Gael Selection Convention, or the Fianna Fáil Selection Convention. And trust me, if you do electoral geography research, sometimes the coverage of selection conventions for different parties in the local newspapers, they're really good. They're really juicy. They kind of give you the details you'll never get in a national newspaper. All the kind of the speeches, a little bit of backstabbing, the kind of shock horror of various decisions that were made about how the selection convention would be held, how the voting would take place, and so on. Anyway, that's a very 16+ minute long overview of how to use the Irish newspaper archives. Hopefully it's some use to you, and hopefully you'll get some use out of this particular resource.